So Berthe Morisot, she is the first Impressionist woman artist. She's one of the first Impressionists. And one of the interesting things is when the Impressionists are discussed, even in the 19th century, I think the first Impressionist exhibit had something like 30 artists, I think over 200 works of art. There were about 6 artists that were always brought up, and Berthe Morisot was one of them. I think somebody says something about 5 men and 1 woman. We do have some photographs of her because she's living in an era when there are photographs, so I found these on the web to show you. We now, of course, when we take photographs, we smile into the camera, but in the early days of photography, people had to stay very, very still. In fact, they sometimes even had braces behind them so that they couldn't move at all because it took a while to expose the plates. And so she does look, quite serious in all of these pictures, but that would be fairly normal for the time. We also have a number of portraits painted of Berthe Morisot, painted by Édouard Manet. And here are 2 of probably the most familiar ones. One where she's sort of semi-reclining, and the other one which is a close-up of her. Now, Berthe Morisot's family was very definitely upper middle class, affluent, and they had a long family interest in art. Fragonard, the very, very famous 18th century Rococo painter, was her grand uncle. Her grandfather was an architect. Her father studied at the École des Beaux-Arts. That's the School of Fine Arts. He wasn't a professional artist. He had a government position. But that interest in art was throughout the family. And they invited artists to the house, and they had social engagements with them, and had them to dinner, things like this. Well, in the 19th century, a well-bred middle or upper class young lady would learn to draw and possibly to paint because it was considered to be a lovely feminine accomplishment. They were not expected, however, to become professionals. So in this family that favored art, painting instructors were found to teach the 2 girls, Berthe and Edmund. Their first teacher was terrible. The girls just wanted to give up. And then they found some rather more professional teachers. One of their teachers was Gicard, who was a pupil of Ingres and Delacroix. Now, when I read that, I just went, what? How can you be a pupil of both Ingres and Delacroix? Ingres was a neoclassical painter who hated Delacroix, the romantic painter. In fact, it's said that if Delacroix would walk into the room, Ingres would stomp out. So I thought that's an accomplishment right there. But obviously someone who was trained, a pupil of two of the most famous artists in history, with very opposing traditions. And then, as we'll see, they also trained with a pupil of Corot. We'll talk about how that came into being. Now, okay, their academic trainer, if you will, or the trainer who was more traditional. He's working with the girls, and he recognizes their talent. And he recognizes their dedication. And so he says to their mother, he gives them her very strong warning. With natures like those of your daughters, my teaching won't end up giving them pretty little drawing room accomplishments. They will become painters. Have you really considered what that means? In your well-to-do society, that would be a revolution, almost a catastrophe. And that is fascinating because it tells you exactly what the woman would have been up against. It would have been unheard of especially from their social milieu, as well disposed toward art as they were, no young lady of that social class should become a professional painter. It should be pretty little drawing room accomplishments. So he's basically warning their mother that they shouldn't have the training, which is interesting. However, they do continue. And Berthe Morisot continues studying with Jacquard. Well, she goes to the Louvre and she's studying the old masters. And of course, one of the things traditionally that artists do is copy in the Louvre and copy in the museums. By 1860, now she's born in 1841, so she's still a teenager. An older teenager, but a young adult. But she says that she wants to paint en plein air. She wants to paint out of doors. Now, that was considered to be fairly radical. Only certain artists were doing that, like the Barbizon school. And even so, they would finish up their paintings in the studio. Jacquard wanted nothing to do with this new crazy thing about painting in the outdoor light, and he really, said, "I'm not doing that." And so he said, "I'll introduce you to somebody who does that." And he introduced them to Corot, who is one of the famous landscape artists of the 19th century. Now, Corot was not going to give lessons. He did not give lessons, but he became a good friend of the Morisots. He would critique the girls' work. He'd lend them paintings. He became a dinner guest. And he recommended one of his pupils, Odinet. And I've seen the name spelled both with the E and with the O as the second to last letter. Now, the point that we need to notice here is that Berthe Morisot was interested in the newest advances of painting. And she somehow found, even her restricted family, she couldn't just go wandering around. She found out about them. As I said, the family's interested in art. I also thought you might want to see a couple of Corots. So here's one. And here is the advice that Corot gave to the girls. He said that you should paint, of course, out of doors, early morning and in the evening after sunset. Because that's when you have this diffuse silvery light and the details disappear. So he's talking about painting, very diffuse painting, very silvery light, which, as you can see, defines some of his paintings. So rather than painting with all the precise details that a more academic training might call for, he's pointing them in the direction of looking at nature and looking at light. But he's not an impressionist. He's still a realist painter. Berthe Morisot had some early success. She's in her 20s, and she has two of her landscape paintings accepted to the Salon, which, of course, as we said, this is the official government juried art exhibition. If you were going to be a professional painter, you had to be juried into the Salon. At least that's what they thought until, the late 19th century. We have the Impressionists who start having their own exhibitions. But we'll hear about that soon. So she does exhibit in about 10 years of the Salon. I found slightly different numbers and from different sources, but essentially she's exhibiting from about 1864 to 1873. And I think there might have been a year they didn't have a Salon at that time because of the Prussian invasion. But she's exhibiting. She's accepted. The critics even say nice things about her work. So she does not have to choose to be, some kind of radical outside the normal establishment. And for a woman to step outside of those bounds is particularly extraordinary. She's probably the first woman that we know doing that, painting in a way that is not the officially approved way that her society says. To think of the context, as famous an artist today as Édouard Manet. Manet had been rejected by the Salon. His work was ridiculed. So Berthe was receiving official approval from the Salon before Manet. She didn't have to exhibit with the Impressionists. She chose to reject the Salon for Impressionism. Now, what happened? We mentioned Edma, who we'd also been warned about that she might become a professional painter if she continued down the path of learning more about art. She didn't. She got married, and she never exhibited again. She probably continued to paint. When I was looking up for information about Berthe Morisot on the web, I actually found a website that was selling a painting of her sisters, and they had dated it in 1904. So she may not have exhibited. She probably, painted in the context of the well-bred woman who has an accomplishment. Now, Berthe Morisot is getting some success at the Salon, but she still has lots of self-doubts. I mean, what she's doing is unusual for a woman. But she's thinking of it more as how can she persevere with her work. And she says, I worked without respite or rest, and it's a pure waste. In other words, she's self-critical. She just feels like, someone else might have looked at it and said, oh, what a beautiful painting, and she might have said, oh, this is terrible. It's not as good as I can do, or as good as I want to do. And there are artists, of course, in history who are self-critical. I think back, being a Renaissance art historian, to what was said of Titian, that he would get out his paintings and he would glare at them like they were his own worst enemy. So she's self-critical, and that's very, very important, I think, for an artist. She does have some self-doubt. She's still young. She's a woman in a man's world, as it were, but she's absolutely dedicated to her art. Now, one of the things we want to talk about is Berthe Morisot and her relation to Édouard Manet. We said that Manet often painted pictures of Morisot. Morisot served as a model. Now, how does this work? She's not a model in a professional sense of a woman who takes off her clothes. She never would have done that. They were family friends. And when she is modeling for Manet, and as you'll see, she's very fully dressed, literally neck to shoe, to toe, she's going to the studio with her mother. She has chaperone, and they are family friends. The Morisots have everybody in. They have Manet, who's the most avant-garde artist of his time. They have people like Baudelaire and Degas, and Zola, so writers as well as painters. That's backwards. The Morisots were invited to Manet's soirees, and they met, the leading artists and writers of the time, Baudelaire, Zola, and of course, in painting, Degas. They became very good friends. They went off on summer vacations together. So one of the things that I thought had been completely laid to rest, but I did find it on a website, not by an art historian, obviously, of someone suggesting that perhaps they had had an affair. There is absolutely no evidence of that. And in fact, I think any kind of logic would completely dispel that. If you run into it, I suspect what it is what has happened to a lot of women when they were successful. People don't think that women could be successful, that they're capable of doing anything, and so they start saying, oh yeah, they must have slept their way to the top. she's a very respectable young woman. She goes chaperoned, and then, as you'll see, she marries Manet's brother. So I think that if you run across that, you should ignore it. Okay, this is one of Manet's paintings, the balcony, and the young woman in the front, seated, is Berthe Morisot. You've seen this before, the painting in the Rhode Island School of Design Museum of Art, which is a very large portrait of Berthe Morisot. One of the things that's very interesting too is that at this time she's already a mature artist in the sense that she has been exhibiting in the Salon for about 6 years, since 1864. It used to be that people would say, oh, Manet, he's now very famous, father of modern art, and Morisot, of course, is a younger woman, so she must be under his influence. But as people sort of freed themselves from that preconception, and they started looking at the evidence, and they started looking at the paintings, they realized that what was happening was, even though you had an older artist who was male and a younger artist who was female, you had a mutual influence. Morisot's work does become bolder under Manet's influence. But Manet also learns from Morisot. His colors become lighter, and she convinces him that he should paint out of doors. So that's really interesting, because we always do associate Manet as one of the people who thinks about how light actually falls. And evidently it's Morisot that gets him to actually go outside and observe that. Now, one of the things that tells us that she was not just going to copy Manet's is what she said herself. She was painting a portrait, and she was, like we said, she's self-critical. She said, it's not going the way I want it to. She says, the work is losing all its freshness. Moreover, as a composition, it resembles a Manet. Who ever heard of Manet being used as something you don't want to do, right? Well, she resists imitating Manet. She chooses not to do that. And she recognizes her own style as something that she wants to do, her spontaneity. And you'll see this in her work, is the beautiful, deft brushstrokes. That her own spontaneity of style is something that's very individual. It's something that's original, and it's something to be prized as perhaps, here it sounds like as something superior to Manet, or at least different than what Manet does. Now, one of the stories about Manet and Berthe Morisot has to do with this painting. This is the artist's sister and her mother. The mother is reading, as you can see, and her sister, Edma, is looking over at her mother. It's now in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. It was painted 1869 to 70, and it was exhibited in the Salon. It was exhibited in the 1870 Salon. I did find one source that thought that perhaps this was also exhibited in the first Impressionist exhibit of 1874, because there is a painting called La Lecture, the reading, and they said, well, maybe it's this one. I'm going to show you another picture that we believe was exhibited that's also called Les Lectures, and it was painted in 1873, so that's probably the one. What happens, of course, with these exhibition catalogs before they start putting pictures in them is you have the title and you have the artist, but you don't always have a description that tells you which painting is which. When we see this theme of reading, which is a very frequent theme in Morisot's work, it's also a theme that pops up in Cassatt's work, and the idea of the woman, and this of course is a woman of leisure, it's not a woman of the working class who has to be working all the time, but the woman who has time to read, and she's actually doing this as an intellectual accomplishment. The question of course comes up of what are they reading? Are they reading some very advanced works, or are they just reading little novels that were written for women? I found a really interesting quotation from Morisot on the web where she, just about the year before she gets married, she's saying that she's reading Darwin. And she says that this is not a proper reading material for a woman, and especially not for an unmarried woman, but she's reading Darwin. So I don't know that's what her mother's reading there, probably not. But it is interesting that women were starting to read things besides what they were told to. In fact, I know in England, and I suspect the same was true in France, women were not supposed to read newspapers. But I think the Morisot did. Now, essentially this is a family portrait. It shows Edma, her sister, who is now pregnant with her first child. She's married and she's pregnant, and it shows the mother reading. So it's very, very sort of intimate, still, genre painting. And Berthe Morisot does ask for Manet's advice, and instead of just making some suggestions or giving his opinion, he takes a brush and starts repainting the section that is her mother. Her mother thinks it's a little funny. Berthe Morisot does not. She is just, I didn't bring the quotation in, but she's really upset about it. So when you really look closely at this work, you're going to see a contrast of the brushstrokes. Morisot's are more refined and delicate and very, very active. We use the word spontaneous and deft. Manet's brushstrokes are more generalized, and he suppresses a lot of the detail. And they're very bold, but they're very different. It's not one's right and one's wrong. The point is that Morisot was an independent artist at her own time, and she wasn't really very happy about Manet going in and repainting parts of her picture. And I think it also showed something else, that Manet still was thinking of her as this weaker vessel or something. They may be good family friends, but he took that as permission to start painting on her painting. I don't think he would have done that with any male artist. So it just shows you sometimes even, the friends, what can I say, that the friend is not always completely open to the idea of a woman artist and a younger woman artist as being his equal. So we have here some more details. Now the composition, of course, composition is Morisot's very interesting composition. It includes geometric forms. The mother becomes a kind of right angle triangle. The top part of her sister becomes a kind of equilateral triangle. And then we see the frame of the picture behind us as this rectangular form. And all this is softened by curving lines, making it much more organic, of course, with the human figures, the curve of the table legs, and the sort of camelback curve of the sofa. And then, of course, the pattern, which is very freely painted, as you can see, but still suggests a very soft pattern in the background. You also have a really interesting contrast of color. The very pale pastels and the very dark garment of the more mature woman, the mother. That is not Manet repainting. He's painting with the same color that she's used. So the mother originally was dark. And of course then the table is sort of a halfway in between. It's dark, but it's not quite as dark as the black garment that the mother is wearing. So you do have a generation picture there. And the painting is filled with light. Morisot mostly paints inside. But you can just imagine the draperies being drawn back and the light of the sun coming through the windows, and you can actually see how it's falling on the two women. And so all of her pictures are just filled with light.